Ever had one of those moments, like, where you just can't think of the right thing to say?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Like you completely blank. We're doing a deep dive today into an English learning podcast episode
Okay.
that really digs into those everyday situations and gives you some phrases that you can use.
Interesting.
So I think there are going to be a lot of aha moments for people listening to this.
I bet.
Um, so to set the scene, this episode starts with a conversation between two people.
Okay.
They meet at a conference, they're chatting, they seem to hit it off.
Right.
But then later on, they bump into each other again, and one of them can't remember the other one's name.
Oh, classic. Yeah, we've all been there.
So awkward.
It is. It really is. But it's more common than you might think.
Yeah.
Remembering names can be tricky for a lot of people.
Is it just a language thing, or is there more to it?
It's not just about language,
Okay.
There's a whole cognitive process involved.
Okay.
And actually, research suggests that faces are easier for our brains to remember than names.
Oh, that's interesting.
So is there anything we can do about it, or are we doomed to always forget names?
Well, no, not necessarily. There are some memory techniques that can help.
Like what?
One thing that works is to create a vivid association when you first hear the name.
Okay.
For example, if you meet someone named Susan and she has really blue eyes, you might picture a sea of blue
Ah, I get.
to link the name with the visual.
That's really clever. I like that.
Yeah, it can really help.
So the podcast actually goes on to highlight a bunch of phrases from this conversation.
Yeah.
One that stood out to me was, in a bit of a hurry?
Oh, yeah.
They play some audio examples of how it's used naturally.
I like that.
Yeah, and it really helps to hear it in context.
Mm-hmm.
So why do you think they chose to focus on that phrase?
I think it's a great example of how we try to soften our language to be more polite.
Oh, I see.
Especially in a busy culture where everyone's rushing around,
Right.
instead of just saying, I'm in a hurry, which can sound kind of abrupt.
Yeah.
Adding a bit of makes it gentler. Right. It's like you're acknowledging the other person's time, even if you don't have a lot of your own.
Exactly. It's a subtle difference, but it's important.
Definitely. And speaking of subtle differences, they also talk about the phrase contact details. It seems simple enough, but is it really just about a phone number these days?
Not anymore. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
In today's world, contact details can include so many things.
Oh, absolutely.
Email addresses, social media, handles, LinkedIn profiles, the list goes on.
Right. It's not just about phone calls anymore.
Exactly. Reflects how we connect with each other now.
So do you think there's like a certain etiquette for which contact details to share in different situations?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Like if you're at a professional event, you might exchange business cards and share your LinkedIn profile.
Right.
But if you're just meeting someone casually, maybe you'd give them your Instagram handle.
Makes sense. And of course, we can't forget about slipped my mind.
Oh, yeah, the classic I forgot euphemism.
Exactly. It's what the guy in the podcast says when he realizes he can't remember the woman's name.
It's a good way to handle that kind of situation.
It is. It's definitely better than just saying, I forgot your name.
Right. It softens the blow and maybe adds a little humor to the situation.
So it's like a linguistic safety net.
Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah,
It's a way to preserve social harmony.
I like that. Now, this is where things get really interesting linguistically speaking.
Oh.
The podcast breaks down the subtle differences between around here, around the corner, and around there.
Okay.
They use examples from the conversation to show how these phrases can be used.
Interesting.
Yeah, it really shows how spatial language can be so nuanced.
It is, and it can be tricky for language learners.
It's not always about the literal meaning.
Right. It's about understanding the context and the speaker's relationship to their surroundings.
So around here might imply familiarity, whereas around there could sound more distant.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And these subtle differences can really change the tone of what you're saying.
It's like there's a whole hidden layer of meaning.
There is, and that's what makes language so fascinating.
It does. Okay, so another interesting phrase they talk about is terrible with.
Uh-huh.
Like terrible with numbers or terrible with directions.
Oh, yeah, we all have our weaknesses.
That's for sure. Actually, I'm terrible with remembering dates.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I'm always mixing things up. It's a good thing I have a calendar.
That's funny.
So why do you think they chose to highlight this phrase?
Well, I think there's often a bit of self-deprecation in it.
You mean like we're making fun of ourselves a little?
Yeah, in a lighthearted way.
So it's more relatable.
Right, it's like saying, hey, I'm not perfect.
And it can actually be kind of disarming.
I think so.
Oh,
It creates a sense of connection, because we all struggle with something.
That's true. Okay, so moving on the podcast then shifts to greetings.
Okay.
And they point out how, how's it going? Feels more natural than a formal how are you?
It does. It's more casual.
So would you say it's like a difference in register?
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't use how's it going in a job interview.
Probably not, unless it was a very informal setting.
So it's all about knowing when to use which type of language.
Exactly. And that's something that comes with experience.
You know what? I have a confession to make.
Oh.
Remember that whole terrible with thing?
Yeah.
Well, I have a story that perfectly illustrates it.
I'm all ears.
Okay, so picture this. I'm at a big family reunion, surrounded by relatives I haven't seen in years.
Oh,
And I completely blanked on my own uncle's name.
no way.
Oh, yeah. It was mortifying. I was trying to introduce him to a friend, and my mind just went blank.
What did you do?
I mumbled something about him being a distant relative.
Oh, that's awkward.
It was so bad. But you know what it made me realize?
What's that?
Even native speakers have these moments.
We do. It happens to everyone.
It's true. We all make mistakes. And sometimes those mistakes turn into funny stories.
That's a good way to look at it.
So before you move on to part 2, I want to leave you with this thought. What are some of the things that you're terrible with in English, or any language for that matter?
Something to think about.
It is. We'll be back in a moment to dive into more linguistic gems from this podcast episode. So we were talking about those moments when you just completely forget someone's name.
Oh, yeah, those are the worst.
I know, and it's so embarrassing.
It is, but, the podcast we're talking about actually gives some advice on how to handle those situations.
Oh, really? I'm all ears.
They suggest being honest and using a little bit of humor.
So, like, what kind of thing would you say?
You could say something like, oh my gosh, my brain just isn't cooperating today, but I really do want to remember your name.
That's good. It's like you're acknowledging the slip-up, but not making a big deal out of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You want to keep the focus on the other person.
Right. So you could even turn it into a self-deprecating comment.
Yeah, like my memory's terrible with names, but I promise I haven't forgotten our conversation.
I like that. That's a good one. So taking a step back for a second, why should we even care about all these little phrases and situations?
Well, because they're not really little, are they?
I guess not.
They can actually have a big impact on how our conversations go.
Oh, I see.
This podcast episode isn't just about vocabulary. It's about understanding the nuances of language and culture.
So it's like learning the unspoken rules of communication.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And by understanding those rules, we can communicate more effectively and avoid those awkward moments.
Right. So this podcast is really useful for anyone who wants to improve their English skills.
It is. And even native speakers can learn something from it.
It's true. I know I've learned a lot from this deep dive.
Me too. It's really made me think about how I use language.
Okay, so let's recap some of the key takeaways so far.
All right.
We've talked about how to use phrases like in a bit of a hurry to politely excuse yourself.
Right. And contact details to refer to all the ways we can connect with each other now.
And slip my mind to soften the blow when you forget something.
And we've discussed the subtle differences between around here and around there.
Plus the self-deprecating humor in terrible with.
And the importance of choosing the right greeting for this situation.
So much good stuff.
There is a lot to think about.
Now, before we wrap things up, I want to hear from you.
Oh, yeah. What are your thoughts?
What are some of the things you're terrible with in English?
Or maybe you have some tips for handling those awkward moments.
We'd love to hear from you in the comments.
So jump in and share your experiences.
We're all in this language learning journey together.
That's right.
Now let's take another deep dive into this podcast and see what other linguistic gems we can find. You know, it's funny how we can connect over these awkward moments.
It is. It's like a reminder that we're all human.
We've all been there.
Exactly.
Mm.
Even language experts have those times when they just blank.
So if you ever find yourself struggling to remember a name or the right word to say, don't beat yourself up about it.
No, just laugh it off.
Yeah, embrace the humor.
And remember, even native speakers have those moments where they're terrible with something.
Absolutely. This whole deep dive has been fascinating.
It has.
It's made me appreciate the power of language in a whole new way.
Yeah, it's amazing how much meaning we pack into our everyday conversations.
It's more than just words.
It is. It's about understanding the subtle cues, the cultural context, and the connections we make.
So as we wrap up this episode, I want to leave you with a thought.
Oh.
What are you terrible with?
And how do you handle those tricky situations?
Share your stories and tips in the comments.
Let's keep the conversation going.
Because language learning is a journey we're all on together.
That's right.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Keep exploring, keep learning, and most importantly,
Keep having fun with language.
see you next time.